not how to finish, because for a lot of it, it's not that hard, but why we don't finish. Oh, I was going to turn the light on. And guilty as charged. So what happened on this was I did all the things and I had to wait for the glue to dry, which it's got to dry for 8 hours. So it got put aside. Well, I picked up something else and started working on it and completely forgot about that one. So that's the case for that one. This one, which I've shown before, I have not even glued the ends on this. I think I might. So this is called Ferrari, and this is the crazy modification that I made after I miscalculated. Had it made into like a shelf for a king-size bed. It was so huge. So it's still kind of big, but definitely more wearable. Would certainly be beautiful on somebody who's a little bigger than me. So I've created another button, and I'm going to just snip an end here, which should have been snipped. So this glue, which makes me wait, I should buy the one that doesn't have to wait. So this one is going to have this, and it will button in the back so that you can control some of the extra fabric by buttoning it into the layers. So I think this is going to be really beautiful. This button, really, there's still one place that you can see. It's right down in there where you can see the thread that I use with the beads. I'm a terrible hand stitcher, so it's just like making it up as we go. And I feel like it needs to be covered. And so I've been I think what I'll do is I brought some yarn around to kind of tie this together and maybe do a couple more wraps of the yarn to cover up that. So you have a point. These finishing requires attention and focus and decisions, which are not things we want to do at the end of the day. So I don't know about you, but I only knit in the evening. And so I'm really glad that I put this one aside probably in January, maybe December. And I just wasn't happy. And when I came back to it, I removed an element and put the beads on, which I love. And I'm much, much happier with the result that I have. So sometimes it's really good to put things off because you kind of mull over. This one, I had added a lot more things to it and I peeled those off. And then I decided that it needed these green pops of color. So I went in and did that. This one is particularly cool. And so the stitches that I use are generally things that I remember from sewing. I was never a good hand sewer, so let's talk a little bit about, we'll just call it decision paralysis as to finishing. So even working in ends, which is super easy to do, you have to make a judgment always, like, where am I going to bury that end? So on this end of this, I've worked in the ends and did I glue them? I didn't glue them. Again, it's superwash. I don't trust it. I'm going to wait and put a dab of glue in. So the other thing that I'm going to do, so this has, and I look at these things and I've got all of these ends, and I realize that for other people that might really disrupt their ability to see what it looks like. For me, I just don't see them, because I know that they're going to be eliminated. So I have this corkscrew, and I only did one at this end because it was a mistake, but it's knitted in, so I can't really take it off. So I'm going to make it into just a little bud-like thing and sew it down so that it's not a dangling thing. I have more beads. I have 8 of these, and I made these to sew on to this end, and I decided that I think I'm going to do some baubles instead, just to kind of tone things down a little bit. So I'll take these out. I have a tiny bit of the green left, and that's it. There was only 50 grams in the skein. So this end, and this is so cool. I just love this. I just switched from knits to pearls or pearls to knits, and it looks like I changed colors. I still had troubles managing my yarn, but so that's really cool. And if you wear it, you can kind of choose which way you want the colors to be. So I'm just going to emphasize the green on this part. Okay. So, but see what a freaking mess this is. So, literally looked at this the other day and just went, oh, how am I ever going to sort? And so I did this. Instead of cutting the yarn, I just pulled up a loop, which means that now I've got a shortish end. I should have left more. But so here I have the dangles, and I'm still not sold on them. They seem a little gauche to me. So I'm thinking of twisting them like that and then taking one of these beads and putting a bead in the center of each of them. Okay, so I have 8 of them. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I might not do it to all of them because to me then, well, first of all, I've got 8, which is an even number. I always like odd numbers. This is where the one on the other end should have been. So I'll put a bobble there. So that'll mean that everything isn't completely matchy, which I also don't like. So I will coil these up. I think even probably should have put the bead in the center of the green. It looks really good. Thank you, past self, who bought these beads when we were up in Canada at the best bead shop in Vancouver. This hasn't even been blocked yet. So, because I wanted to work the ends in before I did that. So now I have a plan of attack. And if I were making a list, I'm going to write down the name and I'm going to put pink and green because I have a feeling I'll do another one. And I'm going to just write down work in ends. Ever wonder why I say work in ends instead of weave in ends? Oh yeah, Reen, isn't that green just unbelievable? It's literally my favorite color. And I will kind of buy anything. It's from Malabrigo and I think it's called Frank Ochre. I just adore it. So I say work in ends because you aren't always weaving them in. Sometimes you're duplicate stitching or doing something else. So I just said, like doing the ends, you have to be making decisions all the time. Is this going to show on the right side? Is this not going to show? Can't pull it too tight because I don't want there to be a lump. You just having to kind of make all these decisions on the go. And that's why we hate to do it because it's not straightforward and there isn't like a rule that says you do this. Okay, so I'm going to work in the ends. I'm going to add bobbles and I don't want them everywhere because I don't want it to be matchy. So I'm going to go add bobbles, approximately 6 or 7 of them. I happen to love to make bobbles. I will probably take out some short DPNs and use that. And kind of wish I'd thought about it when I was doing it because I could have done like different variations. Anyhow, and then I'm going to coil and attach, what are those called? Corkscrews. And then I'm going to add beads. I'm fairly certain, yeah, these have a pretty tiny hole. So I'm going to have to use a beading wire and probably, yeah, that yarn's not going to go in there. So I'll add the beads. Beads are something that I have adopted in the last few years. And then I'll be done. Then and I have to block and steam block. Okay. So here's my finishing plan. And I can stick that with that. I need to get the green from a different location. I have a little envelope over here where I put my yarn bits. And when the envelope gets full, I put them in the basket where Nicole, our cleaning person who provides Ridwell service, picks it up every week. So those are a couple of finishing things and why we hate to finish. So another thing, had a swatch here. Where I'm standing. So this is my next project. two really fabulous yarns and would not have thought to put them together, but I was kind of trying out some different things and laid them down next to each other. And I thought, oh, that's pretty interesting. So one is a multi and the other is a cashmere. It's 50% new cashmere and 50% recycled cashmere. So it's a little fuzzier, probably shorter of cashmere. So I was going to talk about sewing things together, talk about things we don't like to do. So I actually love to mattress stitch, but it can really be a problem when you're joining things and you're not sure where you should join. So let's talk a little bit about that. So when I made this swatch, which I have no intention of ever sewing together, I put an extra stitch on the edge. So it's my stitch pattern plus an edge stitch on both edges. And so I would do what I call the one stitch mattress stitch, which is I would sew it together in a manner that will cause the edge stitch to fall to the inside. And so you come in up from the back, going into the space between the edge and the next stitch. And then you go over to the other side and you go down in the corresponding and bring the yarn across. I'm obviously not going to anchor anything, so I want to take this out. So you end up with something like that. And it's not going to look, and you go under a couple of bars, which would be the run of the yarn from the rows. So you go under a couple of those, and then you go back to where you started and go under 2 bars there. And that's going to shove those 2 edge stitches to the inside. So that's going to cause a little bit of a seam. Doesn't bother me at all. I'm from a sewing background. And for me, one of the benefits is my edge stitches tend to be really crappy. And so I can just get rid of them. And now I've pulled the yarn tight and you can barely see where it's sewn together. If you didn't plan in that edge stitch though, so then you have to go into a stitch, so into the center of a stitch, and you do the same thing, but instead of the security of going into between 2 stitches, you're now just going into the center of stitches. And it works. I mean, it does exactly the same thing, but where my edges are sloppy, I also didn't get that really lined up, it's going to be less attractive. So I always add an edge stitch. I was going to say if I was working somebody else's design, I would add it in if they hadn't, but I literally don't work anybody else's stuff anymore. So, because they don't do it the way I want. So, and the other thing when you're doing the mattress stitch is occasionally pull it. I took out this too, so that you're making sure that you're maintaining the flexibility. And if this stuff against all good advice, you knit something in a garment in bulky yarn and you were seaming it like this, you're just going to end up with an incredible mess because the seam is going to be so big. So in wool, just doing a couple more stitches. This is a little more secure and I can show you the back. I've got like a million samples here, but I have to use the one sitting on my desk. Okay, so that's what it looks like inside, and you can see that there's a stitch on either side. So if you had something that was really bulky or wasn't soft and pliable after you stitched it, you could take it to your ironing board or countertop and wet those 2 stitches. You can wet more of it, but you don't want to do anything with your iron but on those 2 stitches. And then put a cloth. Paper towels work great, but a tea towel is probably what I would use. And then you put your iron down on it and hold it. And you'll see like a bunch of, you don't want to have the steam on, you're trying to get the moisture to dry in the wool. And you have to be really careful to just get it on those 2 stitches. And it's called killing it. So they do that in tailoring to get seams, so like where the notches in a collar, it's not huge because you got like 4 layers coming together. So you can actually kill your seams, and it's not quite like doing it to acrylic, which like changes the fiber, but the yarn will never be the same. So be careful. Be sure you know that it's what you want. But generally on something like this is DK weight, you would not even notice the seam except for the crappy job I did. So, and again, mattress stitch, this is one of the first things I learned. When you're going under, I always say go under 2 or 3 bars. So you're going under rows. Sorry, I got distracted by a little bird out there. Don't do it to every single row. Go under 2 or 3, because if you get too much stitching in there, it's going to distort the seam. That was excellent advice. Got it from somebody in a parking lot when I was doing machine knitting. And I think they said, they'd forgotten to say that in a class. But so, and you know how I pulled it. You want to make sure that seam is, I don't want to say tight. What's the word I'm looking for? Is firm, but still stretchy, so that it doesn't distort your fabric. And it, because you're going across and you keep coming back and going into the same hole that you came out of. So if you do that too close together, you just get too much yarn and it'll warp the fabric and give you a really lumpy, unsightly seam. Let's see. And I talked about buttoning my pin into the fabric. So it works great if you have open stitches. Otherwise, you have to do something else. So here's one that I made for a different version of Capri. And because I wear pins all the time, they never put the pin in the right place. So I often have something that's like falling over. So this one, I really put it on my dress form and made sure that it would hang correctly when I used it. But you can see it's like up at the top of this, but see how nicely it hangs. I wish every jeweler would do that. So I just took a button. I imagine I'll use the same button. I probably bought these in a sale bin. It's like a 3/4 inch button, and it works really well with my open stitches. You just Bob Dylan Fest here on the stereo. See how nice the hummingbirds are out. I call these button links because they're like cuff links, kind of. And so this one just goes into the fabric. Here's one where I just took a decorative button and added a backing button. This is one of my favorites. It's a big button that I bought. I put these cheesy beads on it. With another button and some yarn. And so this I did for shawl. Again, I wanted something that would button it in, but the shawl is really lightweight. And so I put it on this. I put the buttons on a ribbon. So when it's buttoned in, the ribbon is kind of holding it stable. Pretty sure that must be a sewing idea. Looking to see if I've got one of these with a pin. I made this one. Apparently never figured out. This is just a locking, what I was going to do to finish it. So this goes around a scarf. And so it's a trio of buttons, which I've sewn on this little band. And then there's a big snap. So often, buttons are not really our friends in knits. They tend to be too heavy. Here's another one, but very simple. You could also put these on a ponytail if you had that kind of hair thing. Here's another one that I made. And again, the button is right up at the top, so it just sits perfectly. I love this one. I have nothing with a pin on the back. I think they're all pinned into things that I'm wearing. Oh, here's one. So this is just a cheap jewelry pin, and you buy like 24 for $10, something like that. So I was making this one when I was watching. It goes on a plain buff colored cowl. So I was watching what do they do? It's a show about the African influence in American food. It's really good. It was a series. And So I had this bird button and I had this broken bead that my jeweler had offered up to me, and for some reason I took. Oh, and then I have this funny button that I only have one of. I have a little piece of wood in here. And then this is some silk yarn that has elastin in it. So it's kind of crinkled. But I feel like this was very much influenced by African cooking. And so here's another one that has a pin. So again, it's pretty far up. And I love this. This was a swizzle stick. Mitch and I went to this fancy restaurant for our anniversary. It was probably our and I stole the swizzle stick. He was horrified. And then these are pearl sequins from probably the 50s Italian. Here's another one with a pin, and I've not finished this one. I need to figure out how to anchor those buttons differently. So those are really fun things to do that can kind of, if you feel like when you get done knitting something, you need a little oomph. Here's a great idea. It's just 3 almost the same buttons. And so I tied them into a trio with little bullion stitches and didn't finish that one either. This is my unfinished pile. So where would you ever find a mother of pearl button that was that thick anymore? I do love Dusty and her buttons. So you have to make decisions, and that's why we don't. And you have to pay attention. So I was going to talk about picking up stitches, but I think maybe I'll save that. We don't do finishing because it requires of us exactly the things that we're done with by the time we're working on our knits. So you have to make decisions. You have to do it well. When I'm finishing, I often am taking things out. When I make these buttons, I'm constantly just like cutting things out that didn't work. And what else? You should have a plan of some sort. I find no finishing gets done until I have a plan. And, it may not be like several steps. I remember when I was doing this one, which I got done, I happen to love this color. It's called Amber. I think I may have named it. A friend of mine dyed the yarn. And then it's got this like kind of ugly beige with it. Well, I happen to love the colors together, but it was a bit much. And I thought, well, no one else is going to be able to tolerate that. So I added this trim, which is some yarn that I had gotten from Urban Yarn, Sheila Anderson. And I still have a tiny bit of it left. Oh, here. So I thought, I think that yarn will look great, which is why I hang on to all of my ends. And I put the trim on this, and it's just the same stitch that I used in the shawl. I used one needle size larger. So because the yarn's a little bit bigger. I think I probably used a 3 or a 4. And when I say I had nothing to do with it, my knitter did it. And so I just picked up stitches and basically worked 4 rows of the stitch pattern straight. And I think it looks really good because it looks a little soft. This color's a little harsh. It's got a big shawl collar. And so then I wanted to incorporate that into the button. I still have this little bit left. I think when I started this, I may have had 30 grams. Which, one last thing. For finishing, your kitchen scale, one of my favorite knitting room tools. So I have this one, and then I just recently bought one to put into my travel kit because I wanted to weigh yarn a couple of times when we were gone. So I usually weigh my yarn before I put it away, so I know that like I've got 15 grams of that or 35 grams of that or whatever, because I tend to like the same palette. And what I loved about this one was mostly this pale greenish color, but then there's even like sky blue in it, and it just really pops with the amber and this hideous beige, which I think is called oyster. I probably named that one too. But it really brought some life to it, and I did a project out of this yarn and kind of made it over the top, one of my favorite cowls. But it was really a pleasure to come. So I do not use blue, don't like it, but it works so good. in this yarn. And this is why I have so much respect for dyers, because they see things that we don't see, or that I don't see anyhow. So when you put your yarn away, if you put a little post-it or a piece of paper that says how much yarn you have left, then when you're digging through thinking what can I do with this yarn, or how am I going to save this project, which was where I was at with Ferrari, then you can go through your bins and see what's up. And I did just get, I'm always trying to organize myself. So traveling is a thing, so this is a list of what I have in this little carrier, which I bought. You would not believe, like, apparently I need to travel with post-it notes, pens and pencils. Got two kinds of erasers in here, a corkscrew, things like waste yarn, binder clips, which you can use to hold things together if you have to, tape. And this is like only one of the things that I jam paper, but so I got this little scale, not even opened it, but they did provide batteries. So it's this big and it weighs literally nothing. Isn't that freaking adorable? So now I can weigh things while I'm gone. I also use one in the kitchen quite a bit. So, and we often stay in apartments or houses. So now do that. Yeah. So I've got a list of all the things that are in this particular container, so I'm trying to teach myself that I don't have to bring like every pencil on my desk. I'm not really winning that one, but I'm working on it. So that's finishing. And I think, one of my big objections, I've got 2 minutes left, is that designers give you crap instructions. They say, like, seam your sides, sew your side seams. Well, how do you do that? In my blog post about finishing, which is on Substack, I give you links to instructions for doing those button lengths. That was like 2 days of work to do the drawings and come up with language that someone without a sewing background would know how to do. I gave a link to something else, but I can't remember what. Oh, just sewing on buttons onto your knits. Finishing is so satisfying, but it ain't fun. It's fun for about 10 minutes and then it just becomes tedious. So my other piece of advice is, when you're working on finishing, as soon as your mind starts going off or you get impatient, just stop, put it aside. The other thing, for something like seaming, it often works very well to do it on a hard surface. So sit down at a table or something like that. Don't do it in your lap, because sometimes you're just juggling so much. Same for picking up stitches, it's getting stretched. But finishing is so important. It requires a lot of thought, a lot of attention, and you have to be willing to just say, this isn't right, and take it out, because you have spent untold hours knitting whatever you've made, and you want it to look really cool. Final word. I often find I'm not ready to do kind of the final flourish until I've been away from it for a while. So things often sit and I have to wait until I get the right headspace, and, because I'm sick of whatever it is. Even if I haven't done the knitting, I've been writing the pattern and I'm just freaking sick of it. So putting things aside, I finished it like early in the month. And it's been just sitting there, and I look at it most days. And tonight I'm going to have a martini so that no finishing will be done. Although I'm going to sketch a quick flower onto a top that I need to do some embroidery on, because it got stained. It wasn't even a food accident. So have a wonderful weekend. I know that the weather is pretty crappy every place, and I'm complaining about rain, but at least it's been like 40s and 50s. So I'm going down to enjoy the music hour with Mitch and read through the documents I've been working on all week and see if I caught all the mistakes. And thanks for coming by. I will put this up probably Sunday, but Substack is pretty good about just turning it around. So thanks a lot.